I'm Jack O'Neill.
And I'm Joey Pettit.
I'm the Bulldog, Ken Sanders.
And our videographer is Luke Skolarczyk.
So to start off with, thank you for doing this. Obviously, it's a big help to us. We understand that you did not grow up in Milwaukee. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in St. Louis, and St. Louis, Missouri, and I guess I got a taste of Milwaukee and St. Louis. I think the cities are a lot comparable, and I went through a Jesuit education there, so it seemed to be appropriate I end up in Milwaukee.
Did you have any siblings growing up that you kind of play games with or just do some things with?
Yeah, I had two younger brothers, and unfortunately, I was never real close to them because they were 7 and 8 years younger than I was. And when I graduated from high school, I turned professional that year, so they hadn't even gotten to high school yet. So, there was an age, not a barrier, but a distance in our ages.
So, did they ever, once you went on to college, and did they ever come and say hi to you in college or anything?
Well, I only went to college one semester.
Okay.
Because I had some scholarships for baseball and soccer, and if I went to Notre Dame, I had to play both soccer and baseball for my scholarship. So I opted to go to St. Louis University, and after the first semester, I decided I didn't like school as much as I would like playing professional baseball. But my brothers did come. They came and they saw me play when I played in Kansas City.
Okay. So you mentioned a little bit about playing soccer. Was that a big thing for you growing up? Did you play more soccer or more baseball, or which one was your main sport?
I probably played a little more soccer, believe it or not. And St. Louis is a very parochial city, and they have their grade schools. Almost every grade school had a soccer team, and in fact, one of my claims to fame was my 8th grade soccer team, but also the 8th grade baseball team. We won both city championships, soccer and baseball, and so maybe I was a better soccer player than baseball, but it was nice to be able to play those two sports, and now my grandkids are into soccer too.
So you mentioned in 8th grade you played the soccer and the baseball. So when you went to high school, was it still soccer and baseball, or did you add anything else, take anything away?
I played football for 2 years, and I broke a couple fingers on my right hand. And when I came home with my hand in a splint and taped up, my dad said, "You're done playing football, son," because we all were looking forward to me progressing in baseball. But I played all 4 years of soccer at St. Louis University High School, and of course baseball. I lettered 4 years varsity in baseball.
Did those broken fingers you got in football affect your pitching at all in high school, or was it kind of just went away?
Fortunately not. It was on my right hand, and being a right hand pitcher, that was a concern. But I guess they were hairline fractures because it didn't affect my pitching at all, or throwing.
Okay. So outside of your extracurriculars in high school, did you do any certain activities that you found yourself doing over and over again with friends outside of school, or was it kind of just go to school or go home?
Well, when I turned professional, I was just 18, and when the first year I played winter ball in Florida. So, the first year I played year-round baseball. And then the next couple of years, I just played in the United States, of course. And then the third year, I had such a bad year in professionally in baseball that I needed to do something, so I went to Venezuela. So the reason I'm saying that, I never had time to get in too many extracurricular activities in my late teens, you know, and so it was all baseball focused at that time.
Okay. So when you came home from high school, you said there was not much time. So were your parents home? Did you interact with your parents, or were they always out working and you kind of just never really got to bond with them?
Yeah, I stayed at, you know, the first year, I only lived at my parents for like a week, because then I went away to play winter ball, and it was back in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and so there wasn't much time there either. And then I ended up playing 5 years in Venezuela in the Winter League. So those 4 consecutive years later in my career, I was only home, you know, maybe 30 days of the year.
Was playing baseball in Venezuela a big change from American baseball, or was it kind of like the same, or do you have to get used to new things happening, or?
Well, the first year I went to Venezuela was 1963, and not many people spoke English. Not many of the teammates spoke English, and each team in the Latin leagues, you could have what they called 8 imports. And the imports could be American, Cuban, from Panama, but they couldn't be from Venezuela. They didn't necessarily need to be from Venezuela. So I played with some Cubans. I played with a fellow from Panama, and that first year was pretty traumatic also, because that was the year 1963 that JFK was assassinated while I was there. And it was pretty scary, because there was a GE office building kitty corner from the rooming house about 5 of us lived in, and the guerrillas machine gunned that GE building right after the assassination. So we were kind of stuck. What do we do? Do we try to get out of Venezuela? Do we stay? And the games were shut down for a couple of days. But the natives, the Venezuelan players, they took good care of us and made sure we didn't go any place where we might get in some kind of confrontation.
When you were in Venezuela, how did you hear about the assassination? Was it through relatives texting you or calling you, or was it?
It came through the news service.
Okay.
Because in '63 there were no cell phones, there were no texts, and our emails. So you might say it came through the vines.
Yeah. So when you first kind of heard about that, was it like a big shock, like, wow, I couldn't believe something like this would happen, or was it just kind of like, wow, like, I'm not there, I should probably be there? Or did you have any feelings like that?
Yeah, our first concern, there were about 4 Americans on the team, was we have to get out of here, we have to go home. And you know, that subsided after a couple of days, and there were about 6 weeks left in that league, because that was in November that he was assassinated. And the owners of the team were very helpful also, trying to calm things down, and it really didn't have a big impact. There were some guerrilla groups in Venezuela, and in fact I saved one of their letters, a poorly written typed letter, that if you don't, you know, we're gonna kill you if you don't get out of the country or whatever. But after a couple of days, it pretty well subsided throughout the whole country of Venezuela. And you know, baseball's an international game, and the games went on, and we drew great attendance, and nobody bothered us.
So while you were in Venezuela, did you keep in contact with some friends or relatives that you had back home, or was it just you and with your friends in Venezuela?
It was hard to get through, number one, on the phone, and it might take you a couple days to get through. And letters take a week to get a letter. So the communication was not, of course, what it is today, but we survived it.
So going into Venezuela, was it just your decision, or were your parents involved, or did you just kind of say, I'm going, and you didn't kind of really think about it, or was it your parents' decision too?
Well, the parents really had nothing to do because it was professional. Actually, we got paid more to play in Venezuela for 2.5 months than we did for 5 months in playing minor league baseball. Major league was different, but when I first went there, the Kansas City Athletics, who I was the property of, they made the suggestion that, it might be good to go and play in South America. And I chose Venezuela because they had 3 or 4 games a week, where in Puerto Rico, they played 6 games a week, and you had a doubleheader on Sunday. So you had a chance to rest a little more in Venezuela, but the brand of baseball was probably AA or AAA ball at that time. So and the major league teams kind of helped set up a team for you to play with, and then you negotiated your own contract with them.
All right.
So I think going back to your career before Venezuela, did you get drafted by the Royals?
I signed about 3 years before the draft with the Kansas City Athletics, and since there was no draft, you could sign with any team you wished to, and so I had a number of offers, and I had a couple that offered me bonuses, and that was one of the main reasons I signed with the Kansas City Athletics, that they offered me $2,500. In those days, that was about enough to buy a car. So that's the reason, one of the reasons I signed, and they had a good farm system.
So after Venezuela, you come back to the U.S. and you start playing baseball here. What was that like? Kind of thinking like, wow, I'm actually playing professional baseball.
Well, the aura seemed to wear off quickly, because once you turn professional, the first thing you have to accomplish is getting through that first spring training, and you're playing with the best throughout the country, and they're all professional. So it was fun, but it was, I think there was more fun in the game then, as opposed to today. You get big contracts, you have nothing to worry about. And our fun kind of took over the big dollars in those days, and that was the main reason you played, and the main reason was to get to the major leagues.
How different was playing professional baseball from like a high school experience or a college experience? Was it faster? Was it like more intimidating, or what kind of differences were there?
Well, I think I can best describe that is high school. I went to St. Louis University, which is a private high school, and we had 1,000 boys, so the competition was pretty good there. And St. Louis, to this day, I believe has 15 to 20 all boy or all girl schools, and they've always had that many. So when you have all boy schools in the same conference, the competition was pretty good. But I found out that the American Legion ball, which is up to 16 years of age, that was really a good caliber ball. So there was probably high school, then there was American Legion that you played during high school, And then how I can best describe how it changes. Class D ball, you as a hitter, you might see a good pitcher. In those days, there was D, Class D, C, B, A, and AA and AAA. So in those classes, D ball, you might see a good pitcher once a month. You know, maybe a top-notch rookie, bonus baby, and jumping up to C ball, you might face that a good pitcher every three weeks, and on up to AAA, you'd see one probably every week, as opposed to the major leagues, you see a good pitcher every game. So that kind of sets it. The players were that way also. You know, you might see a good shortstop on this team, and then as you go up, you might see a good whole infield that are good. So it changes with the level, but high school was on that bottom realm, and it was kind of intimidating when I went the first couple of spring trainings, because there would be tons of players. And I know that first spring training, I think it was like the military, which I did not serve. But the military, you go through the line, you get your uniform. And I remember going through the line and trying to get the right size baseball pants in spring training, the right size jersey, and you had to provide your own shoes and glove. But at the end of that line, a guy gave me a plastic piece of paper with a number like 365 on it and two paper clips, or two pins. And I said, "What is this for?" He said, "You tape that on the back of your uniform so we know who you are." And I said, "I'm 365 or whatever the number." He says, "Yeah, you are." So it was intimidating that there are that many players there.
How many players do you estimate there were at spring training?
Well, in the lower minor leagues at that time, the players, we didn't stay in hotels, you stayed in a dorm. And there were hundreds, because they really housed from D-ball to AAA. They don't do that anymore. But the players with families would rent out of that, quote, barracks. And I know in Daytona Beach one year I trained, and it was old Air Force barracks. And one wing was the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the other wing was the Kansas City Athletics. And there must have been 500 or 600 people in that dorm.
So, did you have? I'm guessing you had like a dorm mate. Was he like? Would they be another pitcher, or is it kind of just whoever was there?
Well, the lower level guys had 4 guys to a room.
Okay.
And then you had 2 once you got to A ball, and you had room checks every night, and those were the coaches of the various teams. So they were assigned routinely to check, and they knock on your door. The curfew was probably 11 o'clock, as I recall.
Did you bond with any of your dorm mates at all, or?
Yeah, some of the guys, you know, when you spend spring training with them, and you spend 5 or 6 months with them during the season, you can become either very close, or you smell like dead fish. So, in fact, one guy I asked to be best man at my wedding, who was a teammate for about 2 or 3 years. And those guys kind of passed on with time, but some of my best friends today are former teammates in the major leagues.
Was there any healthy competition of like you and one other guy? You kept noticing that you were both pushing each other, trying to become the best you could be?
Yes. When the teams were selected, but in spring training, you're trying to make a team. And even though I might be best friends with a guy that's another pitcher, we might be competing for the same job or the last job on that staff. But when your team is selected, whether major league or minor league, you really bond in a hurry because your goal is to win. Your goal is to get to the major leagues, and if you're at the major leagues, your goal is to win the World Series.
So after Kansas City, what team did you end up going to?
Well, I was traded from Kansas City to the Boston Red Sox, and then 3 months later, I was traded back to Kansas City. So for the first, let's see, that would be about 10 years of my career, I was in the Kansas City A's organization other than the 3 months at Boston. And then in that 10th year of my career, I was traded to the Seattle Pilots.
So when you went from Kansas City to Boston, back to Kansas City, were there any kind of like hurt feelings that, wow, they let me go, but now they're taking me back? Was there anything like that?
Well, and I think most players in most sports will tell you this. So it's changed a little bit in today's society of sports because there's so much money. But that first trade, it breaks your heart because you grew up with all those guys in the minor leagues, and all of a sudden you're with them in the major leagues and you get traded. You feel, I think your first feeling is that they don't want me. But I tried to always keep it in perspective. The other team wanted me. But when I was traded back, I knew the manager there, and he did call me and told me that they really wanted me there. That's why they made the deal. So I felt pretty good going back.
So after the second trip around to Kansas City, you went to Seattle. What was your first experience like in Seattle?
Actually, it was really an eerie feeling because I was traded in the winter, and there were 4 of us traded from Oakland to the Seattle Pilots in the winter of '69 and '70. And the Seattle Pilots were a new team as of 1969. And we went to spring training all excited about our new team, and we find out that the Seattle Pilots filed bankruptcy. So we're in spring training in Tempe, Arizona, and the ball club's in bankruptcy. So we're trying to find out, are we going to have a team? Are we going to get paid? What do we do with our families? And it got real scary till the very end. And that was 5 days before the season opened. And we were told to be in the hotel lobby at 10 o'clock at night. And most of us lived out of the hotel because we had, a number of us had families, so we were living in an apartment with our families. And at 10 o'clock at night, 5 guys walked in, and it turned out they were from Milwaukee, and said, we bought the team, and you're going to open the season in Milwaukee. You do have a new home. So it was pretty exciting, and they ripped off pilots because the uniforms were already done, and with 5 days to go in the season. So they put on Brewers, and they had 3 nautical stripes for the Seattle Pilots, and they were on the first set of uniforms with the Brewers.
So was that Bud Selig that came in and announced to you guys that he had bought the team?
Yeah, Bud Selig was one of the 5 I did not know, and I mean, nobody knew him. He was in the automobile industry, his family's business here, and Ed Fitzgerald was one of the others that I got to know from that group of 5 guys.
What was it like not knowing that whether or not you'd be playing in the major leagues, or whether or not your baseball career could possibly be over because you're technically not on a team?
Well, I think I pretty much felt we were going to play somewhere, and It was scary to the point of getting paid on time. Where will this team go to play? Families, wives were concerned. You know, what are we going to do if you don't play? So that was the concern right up until those last 5 days. And fortunately, we had a home.
What was your first thought when Bud Selig walked in and said, the team's moving to Milwaukee and you're going to play games at Milwaukee? What was your first thought about that?
Well, we're excited. I knew that the Braves had played here, so we're excited to get there. Knew nothing about it, but within 5 days, there were a lot of things other than playing ball. How am I going to get my wife there? We've got a car. She's going to have to drive from spring training in Milwaukee when we had planned to go to Seattle. And the one pretty humorous thing I remember about that with Selig is that one of my teammates sitting next to me, he pointed and he said, "Oh, Jerry Lewis bought the team." And I said, "That's not Jerry Lewis." But when Bud Selig was young and Jerry Lewis was young, there was a little bit of resemblance. And it turned out that, of course, it was Bud, the former commissioner of baseball, or later commissioner of baseball.
So when he came in and said you're moving to Milwaukee, he said you're now the Brewers. Did you have any thoughts about, wow, that's like a really weird name to have for a baseball team, or what was your first thoughts on the name?
Yeah, we knew. I knew the reputation in Milwaukee of a beer capital of the world, so I figured that wasn't too bad. And if I was a big beer drinker, I might have thought, "Wow, we're going to get free beer," which we did.
So in 1970, they moved to Milwaukee. Do you remember how good the team was in 1970 that year?
Well, I guess I should preface that by what they paid for the franchise. They paid $10 million for the franchise, and now we're about 50 years into the franchise. Franchise is worth approximately $1 billion. So they bought it for $10 million, and they sold shares to get an ownership and get some cash. And the 25 players and the 5 coaches, there were 30 of us. If Bud Selig was here today, he'd tell you his biggest fear was, how am I going to pay the salary of these 30 people? It was $729,000. And that tells you a little about our ball club. We had lower paid players, and that just happened to be because of the time. Not many players in all of baseball made it. And we thought we would do pretty good because Seattle was only 1 year old. And when Seattle drafted, that's how the 2 teams that came in that year, they drafted for veteran players. So we had experienced players at almost every position. And it turned out that we didn't do so good. I think we only won 60-some games both years out of 162 season.
Was it hard to kind of keep the morale up or kind of be happy while you're playing these games, knowing that like you're not going to probably make the playoffs and your team's not like the best? Was it kind of hard to have fun playing the sport?
Well, it was fun playing every day, but you have professional pride. You want to get a hit every time. You want to get somebody out every time, and you don't want to embarrass yourself. You want to play good. And in that era, there were a lot of really, really good players. I mean, Baltimore, they had a number of Hall of Famers on that team. A couple of years later, they had 4 starting pitchers that won 20 games in one season. And that's something that I don't think will ever happen today, because you have to win a game in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning if you're going to usually win 20. And they don't say, the starters don't stay in the game long enough today. So we wanted to win. We had a lot of fun. The fans treated us royally.
What was your first experience of like, wow, I'm in the major leagues? Like, did you have a first experience, like maybe the first pitch you threw or anything that happened that really hit you like, wow, I'm actually here?
Well, my first experience in the big leagues was '64 with Kansas City, and I actually have this on film. My first strikeout in the big league was Mickey Mantle. So that was, I didn't know it at the time. I was too scared maybe. But that turned out to be, I think, a pretty good accomplishment, or who was ever known. It could have been Joe Blow that I struck out. But when I came to Milwaukee, it was the first time I pitched. It was kind of, wow, we're really here now. We have a home in Milwaukee and hope it lasts.
So your first strikeout was Mickey Mantle, and you said you didn't really know who it was at the time?
Well, I knew who he was, because he was a superstar in the late 50s and early 60s, because when Roger Maris hit 61 home runs, Mantle, that was in '61. And Mantle had the lead in the home runs over Maris until the last month of the season. So I did know who he was, and the Yankees had some really good teams. So I don't know, maybe I was oblivious that they had such a good team and that many players.
So in the years between your debut and Milwaukee, did you always play for the Royals in those in-between years, or did you play for other clubs?
The only other club I played with it was Boston three times, or excuse me, 3 months. And then I played with Oakland about 3 months in 1968. And so I was kind of up and down in the major league and minor leagues at that time.
So did you keep your first strikeout ball?
No, but I had Mickey Mantle sign a ball for me later, and he signed it to Ken, best wishes, Mickey Mantle. And I heard a story later about Mickey, and if I'd have heard this story, I probably would have never asked him to sign the ball. And but there was a rookie that struck out Mickey Mantle, and it wasn't me. I was a rookie when I struck him out. But the rookie asked Mickey to sign the ball for him, and he sent it over to the clubhouse. And Mickey signed it. And a month later or so, Mickey hit a tape measure home run off the rookie. And they said that Mickey hollered at him, "If you can find that one, I'll sign it too."
So, going up to pitch against Mickey Mantle, did it give any extra nerves that weren't already there, or was it kind of just a regular day to pitch?
Well, I was nervous to begin with, because that was, either I think it was the first game I pitched in, and of all games to have to pitch against the Yankees. So I was pretty nervous, and as I recall.
What team did you find to have the most success pitching against during your career?
In those years and in Milwaukee, I was fortunate. I had good stuff, and I had a great slider. And 70 and 71, I had really good years with Milwaukee, as the records will prove. And I know the California Angels I had good luck against. I had good luck against Baltimore, and they had good teams there. One of the teams I maybe didn't have as good a success was the Oakland A's, and they moved from the Kansas City A's to Oakland, and a lot of those guys I grew up with in the minor leagues, and they won 3 World Series in a row, 72, 3, and 4. And so I didn't have as good a success against them.
Were you always a relief pitcher in the majors?
In the major leagues, I did start one game by accident. Catfish Hunter was sick, and they said, "You're starting tonight." So that was the only one. But in most of my minor league career, I was a starter until probably the last 3 years, and then they converted me to a relief pitcher.
Were you a good hitter? Every now and then you got the chance to take a few swings?
In the minor leagues I was, because in high school and amateur ball I played shortstop and pitch. And in the minor leagues, as a starter, you get to hit quite a bit. You get to take batting practice quite a bit. But in the major leagues, if you're an American League team, there's a DH, so you never get to take batting practice. So when you have interleague games, you might take batting practice as a starter, but I found out recently one of my hits was against Jim Palmer, so that kind of made my day.
Did you realize it at the time when you got that RBI off of him, or you kind of just like, I'm just glad to have an RBI? Or what kind of was like that?
I think I was probably just happy I got a hit and got an RBI.
So, going back to pitching a little bit more, I know I recently also heard that you had a little black book where you would write down kind of the weaknesses of hitters. So what kind of like things would you put in there, and what helped you through the season?
Well, I started that. It was sort of a takeoff from one of my catchers in Kansas City, and he became. There are a few catchers that became pitching coaches. And this fella, Dave Duncan, was a pitching coach with the Cardinals for many, many years with the manager there, Tony La Russa, and wherever Tony went, Duncan went. And Duncan used to keep a chart on every hitter, every pitch thrown. And in Major League Baseball, they do record every pitch. Today it's electronically, but in those days you used to do it with pencil. And so when I came up in the 60s, I started to keep a book, and I had different tabs for each team. You know, the Yankees were blue, maybe Baltimore was orange, and then I listed every hitter on that team and their weaknesses, their strengths, and then how I pitched them. And what they did off of me to give me a pattern of how to pitch that person and to stay away from his strengths. I still have that book.
Do you remember anybody that gave you trouble, like you could not find their weakness, or anybody where you found like where you look in the book and it'd just be blank because you just couldn't figure it out?
Yeah, and the hitters I had trouble with were the hitters that sprayed the ball, because I didn't throw 95, and I was more or less a finesse pitcher, a sinker slider pitcher. And people asked me who were the two best hitters you faced, and the two of them later I became teammates with them. They were both with Minnesota Twins, Tony Oliva and Rod Carew, and they both won batting titles, both left-handers. But I remember Oliva pitching him away, he'd hit the ball the opposite field, pitching him in, he'd pull it. And Rod Carew, one year he had 25 bunt base hits. And you know, if you get 200 hits in a season, that's a mega year. So you figure 25 he had were bunts. And today, Major League Baseball, they don't have 25 guys trying to bunt, you know. But I did find out how to get Oliva out one time. I made a mistake and hung a slider, and he popped it up. And I said, all these years I'm trying to throw him on the black outside, inside. He's killing me. So from then on, I threw about a 3/4 slider down the middle of the plate, and I never had much trouble with him after that.
So you previously mentioned that you threw a sinker and slider. What other pitches did you throw?
Actually, I threw a changeup, and I did not throw many changeups. Reggie Jackson broke me of that habit. He hit one about 400 feet off of me, so I said, I'm going to get away from my changeup. But I basically threw two pitches, the sinker, a fastball, which was a sinker, and the slider. But my slider, I like to think I did throw three pitches off of that, because a perfect slider is not straight across. It's down about, I don't know, 30 degrees. And if you throw it harder, the break is shorter, so it would be a cut fastball. And then if you took a little bit off, it got bigger. Not quite to a curveball, but so that was a good waist pitch where the cut fastball, that was a good pitch inside.
Did pitches like that or anything like that earn you a cool nickname?
In closing, well, my slider when I came to Milwaukee in 70 and 71 was the best slider in baseball. I had this great slider, but I had one problem with that. I used to get a blister on my finger. And it actually would get to be about the size of a dime, and sometimes it would bleed. And it never kept me from pitching, because in 71 I pitched in 83 games here. So I was having great success. I tried tincture of benzoin on it. I tried all kind of stuff, and I couldn't get it to harden up where it wouldn't bleed or turn into a blister. And in the third year, 72 in Milwaukee, the blister went away, but my slider also went away. I went from one of the best to an average one, and I would have loved to have gotten the blister back. So it must have been the way I was gripping the seam on the ball.
So when you first got to, whether it be Milwaukee or any other team, were there any veteran players or managers or any coaches that kind of took you under the wing and kind of showed you the ropes of how to play in the majors?
When I first came in '64, there were, in those probably before '70, the veteran players were real tough on the rookies. And they wouldn't talk to you, and you had to earn their respect. And then later years, you have, quote, good guy in the clubhouse, and actually in Milwaukee right now, I think Ryan Braun is one of those. And I've gotten to know Ryan fairly well. And back in the day, the rookies stayed together, and there weren't too many rookies on a team. But with Milwaukee in '70, there was a former teammate of mine who was a pitching coach, Wes Stock, and he pretty much looked after me and tried to teach me the ins and outs. But I'd only played a very short time before I got here. But he was good, and there were a few guys I became close to on that team that we hung around with.
Did you earn any nicknames during your time in the pros?
The first one went way back to Kansas City, and the reason I don't like this one, but I'm telling you, because it's in the baseball encyclopedia, Daffy Duck. This player, first baseman on the team, gave me it because he said I walk like a duck. And then when I came to Milwaukee, some people said it was the manager, Dave Bristol, but I think it was Bob Uecker who gave me the nickname of Bulldog, and that was from my tenacity on the mound.
Were there any good friends you made throughout your time playing baseball, whether that be a teammate or anybody kind of involved with the organization?
Yeah, when I first came to Milwaukee, Mike Hegan became a very close friend. He was our first baseman, And he went on to broadcast many years with Cleveland. And we did a lot of family things together, get together for barbecues, on days off. And the wives were closer then too. They were close at the ballpark. And I know there were a lot of parties. There always seemed to be at my house that the wives had when we left town. But Hegan became a very good friend.
So when baseball came back to Milwaukee in the form of the Brewers, it was the first time they had a baseball team in a while. And I read somewhere that when the Braves first came, it was a hysteria of fans coming, but when the Brewers came, it wasn't like as much. So what do you think was kind of the effect of the Brewers coming into Milwaukee, and what do you think the fans thought?
Well, I know that there was some animosity towards baseball in general because they lost the Braves, and the Braves won the World Series here, and I think the majority of the fans felt jilted, and so we had to win back the fans, and there were some marketing ploys. Actually Bernie Brewer was created in 1970, and he lived in a trailer up on top of the scoreboard until we drew 40,000 fans, and he never came down, and he said that he was frightened a few times. There were bikers that came by at night and would shake the pole that it was, or the structure that it was on. And every night it was pretty much fun, because he would be delivered dinner from Carl Rosch's or some of the finest restaurants in town, because they'd get a plug for providing the dinner. So we had to win back those fans, and eventually it happened, and we became fans of the other sports, because the Packers, we used to go to the Packers and the Bucks games, and the Packers played 4 games in County Stadium at that time, 1 exhibition and 3, and became friends with some of the both teams' players.
So you were with the Brewers in 70 and through 71, where the Bucks ended up winning the NBA championship. So did you have any feelings towards that? Did you know any of the players personally, or did you go out and party with the team after they won, or what was that like?
Yeah, we would go to the games as they would probably go to ours. So we were included in the parties with the Bucks and John McLaughlin and Eddie Doucette, who was a broadcaster at that time. I remember Dick Cunningham, Lou Alcindor, who later became Kareem. He never came around. He was just a pretty quiet person. Apparently, he could, as we know, he was a great player. So we had great times with those guys, and it was fun watching them bring home a world championship. And with the Bucks, a few of them stayed around in the winter, and I remember David Robinson with the Packers, Packer Hall of Famer. He worked for Schlitz Brewery for many years in the off season, and but most of us, I know from that 70 team, the Brewer team, there were 16 of us spent the winter in Milwaukee. And I've always said, not because we like the weather or because we like the taxes, but 15 of us got jobs, and the other fellow, he went to college. So those were part of the early years.
So once the baseball career finished, what kind of work did you get into?
Well, I met my former partner in real estate about a year and a half before I retired. I met him at a Christmas party, and he said, "What are you going to do when your career is over?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'm going to have to do something because I have 3 kids. And he said, would you be interested in a career in real estate? And I said yes. And I think we met, and I went to spring training. Since it was Christmas, spring training was coming up. So he sent me the real estate manual, and I studied it on the road. And that winter when I came home, I took my broker's license, got the broker's license, and then after 77, that's when my career ended, and I took a week off and went to work in real estate.
So before you were at this Christmas party and this guy was kind of like, you should do real estate, you didn't really think about that or really know where to start with that?
No, in fact, I was thinking about possibly going into insurance. And since I did not finish college, and I hadn't given a future career a whole lot of time till it got towards the end, because like everybody, you think your career is never going to end. And I did not want to stay in baseball. I could have stayed in baseball as a coach, but I was never home for my kids' things, first day of school, all their school functions in grade school. They were all in grade school at that time. So I wanted to sort of be homebound, and that's when I made the decision to get into real estate.
So did you have to go to college or take classes to become a real estate agent?
Yes. Today there's continuing education with a lot of careers in real estate insurance. But I took classes in order to, the exam was pretty intense, and took a lot of classes as far as marketing techniques, etc. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions of my life. We became the Coldwell Banker franchise in Milwaukee. We had commercial, residential, and we had mortgage and title insurance. So we covered the whole thing, and we had Metro Milwaukee. So it covered, a big part. And then in 1999, we sold that. But I did keep my broker's license, and I think one of my best things in that real estate career, and maybe the most fun thing I had, was the listing and the selling of the Field of Dreams movie site in Dyersville, and it was that was not only rewarding, but it was also monetarily a nice thing to do also.
So how did you come into contact with the Field of Dreams, saying they want this field, and how did that all come to be?
Well, a very interesting story with that Field of Dreams. Over the years, I ran some fantasy camps, and I ran 2 fantasy camps, and the years were 94 and 95, and I ran a Field of Dreams fantasy camp. So I got to meet the owner of the farm, and it was it should be a movie or a book, I think. But 2 years after the movie came out, the farmer that owned that field, he put up a concession stand. And to this day, we're talking about 2018, there are about 70,000 people visit the Field of Dreams a year. And so many people visited it, the concession stand was making a lot of money. He was selling shirts and mugs and food. And it turned out that if you drew a line from third base across second base, he didn't own the outfield. The farmer on the hill owned it, and he threatened to bulldoze it. So eventually, it was like the Hatfields and McCoys. They resolved their differences, and he had wanted to sell, but I told him he couldn't because he doesn't own the whole field. It would diminish the value of it. So eventually he bought the other farmer out, and we put it for sale in about 2011, and then we sold it in 2013.
Do you think your career in baseball helped you to like kind of make that deal with that, or help you at all in any sort of like real estate or banking at all?
Well, I've had a number of things in my life that have been, I guess, living in dreamland or fairyland. And if I hadn't played baseball, I would have never had Field of Dreams of our fantasy camp at the Field of Dreams. So that's how I met them. If I was thinking about this recently, that if I didn't come to Milwaukee with the Brewers, I wouldn't have made my home here. And I like to think the franchise brought a lot to the city as I came with it. And one of those is maybe we embellished Marquette High a little bit because my son went to school here, my son-in-law went to school here, and my first grandson named after his grandpa, Joe McLaughlin, he's in school here now. His brother will be here next year. Sal Bando's kids, they all went to school here, and Larry Heisel and John McLaughlin. So, yeah, baseball's helped me in a lot of avenues. I think it helped me be successful in real estate because, number one, being a former major leaguer, being a former brewer opened a lot of doors for me as we did a lot of corporate business. And so I have a lot to thank for your baseball.
So you mentioned that you helped form Kowal and real estate investment. How did that form?
The what? I'm sorry.
Kowal and real estate. Kowal and real estate.
Yes.
How did that formulate? Did someone ask you to become his partner, or?
Yeah, the fellow I met told me if I joined him, he'd give me an opportunity to buy in a couple of years. He was the principal at the time. So I did that 2 years after I got out of the ball, and we were trying to grow in real estate, and we were unaffiliated at the time. And we ended up buying the franchise, a Coldwell Banker franchise. So I think there were visions of that it would help us grow faster than we could independently, and with the brand name of Coldwell Banker.
So after Kowal, did you do anything else? Did you like invest in anything else, or was that kind of it?
Well, I got involved in a number of community things, and one was I had the relationship with John McLaughlin, who played for the Bucks, and also Eddie Doucette. And Eddie Doucette's first kid developed a blood disease, and we were talking at lunch one time, how can we help out? And as I remember, there were 7 of us that decided on a charity, and that charity became the MAC Fund. And that was in 1976. 75, we actually met. The MAC Fund was formed, and it was the Milwaukee, it had the name Milwaukee into it, and as it grew so fast, it changed the name to Midwest Athletes Against Childhood Cancer from Milwaukee. And so I've always been involved with the MAC Fund, and I think the second thing that I got involved in, and it turned out to be really important for the city, was the building of Miller Park. I got involved in it to help lobby with Bud Selig, Bob Euchre, Robin Yount, and Jerry Barle, a renowned attorney in town. And I remember going around the state and help to hopefully get the community behind it and the funds behind it to get it built. And I think if that stadium wasn't built, Miller Park. The Brewers, who knows what they would have done. But Milwaukee might have lost another franchise, and then there would have never been baseball here. And just think what that did for the community. Without this ballpark, without this ball team, I think it really was a boost for the economy if you look at the long end of it.
So when you were involved in that building in Miller Park, was it kind of like bittersweet, kind of we're cool, we're building a new stadium, but was it kind of like, I'm gonna miss County Stadium? Was there any like that feeling?
Well, County Stadium was pretty memorable. You know, you had the Packers play there over the years. But even in 1970, that stadium was already probably obsolete to some of the other stadiums in Major League Baseball. And I laugh at this frequently that in County Stadium, if you didn't get in the shower quick after the game, you were going to get a cold shower. And I remember I'd like to have 2 beers as I took my uniform off and got in the shower. And that's all I could do because the showers would be cold. So it was time for a new stadium, and it was time for one with a roof on in this climate, because I remember playing when it was cold and rain and sleet. And so it was fun getting involved with it, and I knew how much the team and the state needed a new stadium.
So going back a little bit to the MAC Fund, are you still involved in that, or is it kind of like once it got bigger and bigger and bigger, you kind of like stepped away a bit, or what's with that?
Well, I'm still involved in it from a couple standpoints. I'm a lifetime member on the board member, and I do appearances for them. I do things for them, as everybody in Wisconsin knows how big the MAC Fund is. And they're all, the golf tournament I played in every year, to raise money for the MAC Fund, and I attend some of the other events. I do a few speaking engagements for them at special events where they recognize the MAC Fund.
So I think one of the biggest athletes that kind of outright supports the MAC Fund is probably Aaron Rodgers. Have you had any contact with him, or do you talk with him at all about kind of what the MAC Fund has done?
I have never met Aaron, and but I, like a board member, a fan of the MAC Fund also. I really appreciate all Aaron's done, and he has done so much, and not only help raising money through his identity, but what he's done for kids. He visits some of those kids, and it just warms up the heart of many of those kids. So hopefully one of these days I'll meet Aaron, and I could probably do that with a little bit of effort, but hopefully it's when they win a Super Bowl.
And I think one of the last questions we have is, what do you hope to see from the Brewers in the next few years, since they almost made a run at it this year? So what do you hope in next year? Well,
I'm very excited about the team. I was excited about last year, one game away from getting to the World Series, and I look forward to them having an even better this year, because I believe their pitching is going to be better. They have, their 2 top pitchers. One didn't pitch at all last year, and the other one will be back. So I look forward to them maybe winning 100 games this year. And once you get to the playoffs, you can win it all.